Story 1. Daniel Wayne Cook was born on July 23, 1961, in the United States. He was a white male with brown hair and blue eyes. From the very beginning of his life, Daniel faced serious problems that most children never experience. His mother drank alcohol and used drugs while she was pregnant with him. This caused damage to his brain before he was even born. The doctors and mental health experts who later examined him would confirm that this early brain damage affected how his mind worked. Daniel's childhood was not a normal one. He did not grow up in a safe or loving home. Instead, he suffered from severe abuse that started when he was just a baby. His father burned his penis with a cigarette when Daniel was still an infant. This was only the first of many terrible things that happened to him. As he grew older, the abuse continued from many different people. His parents hurt him. His grandparents hurt him. His stepfather and stepbrothers also hurt him. The people who were supposed to protect him were the ones who caused him pain. The abuse did not stop when Daniel was removed from his family. He was placed in foster care, but the foster parents also abused him. He was sent to group homes, but the people running those homes were also dangerous. One group home leader did terrible things to Daniel. When Daniel was 15 years old, this group home leader forced him to have a circumcision. This was not a medical procedure done for health reasons. It was done as a form of punishment and control. The same group home leader also raped Daniel. There was a room in the group home called the peek-boo room. This room had a one-way mirror. Adults would watch from the other side while boys were abused. Daniel was forced to spend time in this room. He was often naked and handcuffed to a bed while the group home leader raped him. These experiences caused Daniel to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. His mind was deeply damaged by years of constant fear and pain. Because of all this abuse, Daniel had many mental health problems as he grew up. He struggled with his emotions and his behavior. He had trouble fitting in with others. At some point in his life, he attempted suicide. His mental state was unstable, and he could not find peace. He also started using drugs and alcohol as a way to cope with his painful memories. He drank heavily and used methamphetamine. These substances made his problems worse instead of better. As a young man, Daniel moved around and tried to find work. He eventually ended up in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. This is a town located in the western part of the state, near the Colorado River. It is a place where many people go for recreation and tourism. Daniel got a job at a restaurant in this town. He worked there with other people, including a man named John Matsky and another man named Carlos Froyen Cruz Ramos. Carlos was from Guatemala and was working in the United States. The three men worked together at the same restaurant, and they also shared an apartment. They lived together in a 2-bedroom apartment in Lake Havasu City. Carlos did not have his own bedroom. He slept on the floor in the apartment. Another person who worked at the restaurant was a young boy named Kevin Swaney. Kevin was only 16 years old. He was a dishwasher at the restaurant. He was a runaway, which meant he had left his home and family. Sometimes he would stay overnight at the apartment where Daniel, John, and Carlos lived. Kevin was a guest there from time to time. Daniel had a criminal history before the events that would later change his life, but it was not a history of violent crimes. He had been charged with misdemeanors, which are minor offenses. He had never been charged with a felony, which is a serious crime, before the summer of 1987. He had also never been convicted of a violent crime. To the outside world, he may have appeared to be just another young man trying to get by. But inside, he carried the heavy weight of a childhood filled with horror. On July 18, 1987, Daniel quit his job at the restaurant. He stopped working there. That same day, he began drinking alcohol and smoking methamphetamine with his roommate John Matsky. They spent the day getting high and drunk. At that time, Carlos Cruz Ramos was living with them, and Kevin Swaney was also known to them through work and occasional visits. The four young men were connected through the restaurant and the apartment. Daniel's life up to this point had been a sad and difficult journey. He was born into a world that did not care for him. He was hurt by the very people who should have loved him. His mind and body were damaged by years of abuse. He turned to drugs and alcohol to numb his pain. He was now 25 years old, living in a small apartment with two co-workers, and his life was about to take a dark turn. But what happened next would not be because of his past alone. It would be a series of choices and actions that would lead to terrible consequences. On July 19, 1987, the day after Daniel quit his job, he and John Matsky continued their drinking and drug use. They were both living in the same two-bedroom apartment with Carlos Cruz Ramos. That afternoon, Daniel told John that he knew Carlos had a lot of money. Daniel wanted to take that money. He came up with a plan to steal from Carlos. Daniel told John to take Carlos upstairs to look at the view from the bedroom balcony. John did this. While John and Carlos were upstairs, Daniel went through Carlos's belongings and found a money pouch. He took about $90 from that pouch. He put the money in his own pocket. When John and Carlos came back downstairs, Carlos noticed that his money pouch was missing. He asked Daniel and John if they knew where it was. Daniel told Carlos to look upstairs for the pouch. Carlos went upstairs to look. When Carlos was in Daniel's bedroom, Daniel grabbed him. At the same time, John ripped up some bed sheets into strips. Together, they used these strips to tie Carlos to a chair in Daniel's bedroom. Daniel then punched Carlos in the face. He asked Carlos how much money he had. Carlos replied that he had about $90. Daniel took the money from his own pants pocket, counted out $97, and threw it on the ground. After that, Daniel and John went through Carlos's other belongings to see if he had anything else they could steal. While they were searching, Carlos managed to free himself from the chair. He tried to run away, but Daniel chased him down, caught him, and brought him back upstairs. They tied him to the chair again, but this time they made the bindings much tighter so he could not escape. Once Carlos was securely tied, Daniel and John began to beat him. They hit him with their fists. They also hit him with a metal pipe and a wooden stick. They did not stop after a few hits. They kept beating Carlos over and over. Daniel also took a knife and cut Carlos on his chest. John put a bandage on the cut to try to stop the bleeding. Daniel burned Carlos on his chest, stomach, and genitals with cigarettes. Daniel also sodomized Carlos. He used a mini stapler on Carlos's foreskin and stapled it to the chair. John asked Daniel why he was torturing Carlos. Daniel replied, "I'm having fun." The torture went on for many hours. At around 11 o'clock at night, John told Daniel that they could not let Carlos go. Carlos had seen their faces and would tell the police. Daniel agreed and said that they should kill Carlos at midnight. He called midnight the witching hour. They continued torturing Carlos until the clock struck 12. At midnight, John tried to strangle Carlos with a bedsheet. When that did not work, John placed Carlos on the floor. He put the metal pipe across Carlos's throat. Then John stood on the pipe. He pressed his full weight down on Carlos's neck. Daniel also pressed down on one end of the pipe, while John pressed on the other. They did this until Carlos stopped breathing. His heart stopped beating at about 12:15 in the morning on July 20th, 1987. Carlos Cruz Ramos was 26 years old. After he was dead, Daniel and John threw his body down the stairs and then put it inside John's bedroom closet. About 2 hours later, at around 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, Kevin Swaney arrived at the apartment. Kevin was the 16-year-old dishwasher from the restaurant where they all worked. He often stayed at the apartment as a guest. Daniel first told Kevin to leave, but then Daniel changed his mind and invited Kevin inside. Daniel told Kevin that they had some drugs they wanted to get rid of. Then Daniel pushed a couch in front of the front door. He did this so nobody could enter or leave the apartment easily. Daniel and John then told Kevin that they had a dead body in the apartment. Daniel took Kevin upstairs and showed him Carlos's body in the closet. Kevin was very scared and started crying. When they came back downstairs, Daniel told John to get more bindings and a gag. Daniel forced Kevin to take off all his clothes. Then Daniel and John tied Kevin to a chair. John asked Daniel what he was planning to do. Daniel said he was going to talk to Kevin. John told Daniel that if Daniel was going to torture Kevin, John did not want to be part of it. John went to the living room and fell asleep in a chair. While John was asleep, Daniel sodomized Kevin. Kevin was still tied to the chair and was crying throughout this time. At around 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, Daniel woke John up. Daniel told John that he had sodomized Kevin. He said that because of this, they now had to kill Kevin too. Daniel took a bedsheet from around his neck and wrapped it around Kevin's neck. Daniel and John each took one end of the sheet and pulled, but John's end kept slipping out of his hands. At that point, Daniel said, "This one's mine." He put Kevin on the floor and strangled him with his own hands until Kevin died. Daniel then carried Kevin's body upstairs and put it in the same closet where Carlos's body was. After both murders were done, Daniel and John went downstairs and fell asleep. Later that day, John went to work for about 2.5 hours. He quit his job and came back to the apartment because he was worried about what Daniel would do if he was not there. When John returned, he and Daniel went to a bar and drank for several hours. At 10:30 that night, they came back to the apartment and met some friends by the pool. They invited these friends inside. The next morning, John took one of those friends, a man named Byron Watkins, aside and showed him the two bodies in the closet. Watkins was shocked and told John that he had to go to the police. Watkins convinced John to confess. John agreed. John and Watkins went to the Lake Havasu City Police Department. John gave a videotaped confession to the police. He told them everything that had happened. He admitted that he and Daniel had killed Carlos and Kevin. He pointed the finger at Daniel as the main person who had tortured and killed the victims. The police now knew about the two dead bodies in the apartment. They had a confession from one of the killers. After John Matsky gave his videotaped confession at the Lake Havasu City Police Department, the police had all the information they needed to act. They knew there were two dead bodies in the apartment that Matsky shared with Daniel Cook. They also knew that Cook was still inside that apartment. The police immediately went to the apartment to arrest Cook. They arrived at around 4:50 in the morning on July 21st, 1987. When the officers entered the apartment, they found Daniel Cook and took him into custody without any struggle. They then searched the apartment and found the bodies of Carlos Cruz Ramos and Kevin Swaney inside the closet of Matsky's bedroom, just as Matsky had described. The bodies were removed and taken to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The autopsies confirmed that both victims had been strangled. They also showed the many injuries that had been inflicted on Carlos before he died, including the burns, the cuts, and the damage to his body. The autopsy on Kevin showed that he had been sexually assaulted. Semen was found on his body, though the identity of the person who left it could not be determined with certainty. The police also collected physical evidence from the apartment. They found Daniel Cook's fingerprints on the chair that had been used to tie up Carlos. They found his fingerprints on the closet door where the bodies had been hidden. They found his fingerprints on the stapler that had been used on Carlos's body. They also found his semen on the strips of bedsheet that had been used as bindings. John Matsky's fingerprints were found on the knife that had been used to cut Carlos's chest. The metal pipe and the wooden stick used in the beatings did not have clear fingerprints that could be identified. After Cook was brought to the police station, he was read his Miranda rights. This means the police told him he had the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, and that anything he said could be used against him in court. After hearing these rights, Cook chose to speak. He told the detective, "We got to partying. Things got out of hand. Now 2 people are dead." When asked how they died, he said, "My roommate killed one and I killed the other." He also admitted that he killed Kevin Swaney. But after making these statements, Cook stopped talking. He said he did not want to make any more statements, and the police stopped questioning him. Now that both men were in custody, the legal process began. On July 21st, 1987, the same day they were arrested, Daniel Cook and John Matsky were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. A grand jury later indicted both men on these charges. The prosecution had a very strong case against Matsky because of his videotaped confession. But they also had strong evidence against Cook, including his own statements to the police and the physical evidence found in the apartment. The prosecution and John Matsky reached a deal. Matsky agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder. In exchange for this guilty plea, the state dropped the 2 first-degree murder charges and all other charges against him. But there was one key condition. Matsky had to testify against Daniel Cook at his trial. He had to tell the jury everything that happened, just as he had told the police in his confession. Matsky accepted this deal. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for his role in the murders. He was not offered the death penalty because he cooperated with the prosecution. Daniel Cook, however, was not offered a plea deal. He would have to stand trial for 2 counts of first-degree murder. The state announced that it would seek the death penalty against him. Before the trial began, Cook made a very important decision. He decided to give up his right to be represented by a lawyer. He wanted to represent himself in court. This is called proceeding pro per, or representing yourself. The judge strongly warned Cook about how difficult this would be. The judge explained that Cook did not have legal training and would be at a disadvantage. Cook insisted that he wanted to do it anyway. The judge asked him many questions to make sure Cook understood what he was giving up. After this long conversation, the judge ruled that Cook's decision was made freely and with full understanding. The judge allowed Cook to represent himself. However, the judge also appointed Cook's former lawyer to stay on the case as an advisory counsel. This meant the lawyer could give Cook advice, but Cook would be the one actually running his own defense. Cook's trial began on June 27, 1988, in Mojave County Superior Court. The judge presiding was Stephen F. Kahn. The prosecutor was Eric Larson. During the trial, the prosecution presented its case. John Matsky was the star witness. He took the stand and told the jury in detail how he and Cook had tortured and killed Carlos Cruz Ramos and Kevin Swaney. He described the beatings, the burns, the sexual assaults, and the strangulations. The prosecution also presented the physical evidence, including the fingerprints, the pipe, the knife, and the bedsheets. The detective who had arrested Cook also testified. He told the jury about the statements Cook made at the police station, including Cook's admission that he killed Kevin Swaney. Cook conducted his own defense. He tried to argue that he was not present at the apartment during the murders or that Matsky was lying. He called a witness who was a fellow jail inmate. This witness said that Matsky had told him that Matsky killed both people alone. But the jury did not find this testimony convincing. The trial lasted about 10 days. On July 7, 1988, the jury went into deliberations. They came back very quickly, after only about an hour and a half. They found Daniel Cook guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. After the guilty verdict, the case moved to the sentencing phase. This is where the judge had to decide if Cook would receive the death penalty or life in prison. At the sentencing hearing on August 8, 1988, Cook made a shocking statement. He told the judge that the only sentence he would accept was death. He refused to present any evidence that might have convinced the judge to show mercy. He did not bring up his childhood abuse or his mental health problems. He did not bring up his drug or alcohol use. He simply said he wanted to die. The judge, however, had to make his own decision based on the law. The judge looked at the aggravating factors, which are reasons to make the sentence more severe. He found several aggravating factors. First, the murders were especially cruel, heinous, and depraved. The torture and suffering of the victims was extreme. Second, Carlos Cruz Ramos was killed for pecuniary gain, meaning for money, because Cook had stolen from him and killed him to cover up the theft. Third, Cook was convicted of multiple homicides, meaning he killed 2 people, and each murder was committed during the commission of the other one. The judge then looked for mitigating factors, which are reasons to make the sentence less severe. He considered Cook's lack of prior felony convictions. He also reviewed the mental health reports that had been done before the trial. But the judge found that there was no connection between Cook's mental problems and the murders. He also found that Cook's intoxication did not impair his ability to know what he was doing. The judge found no mitigating factors that were strong enough to outweigh the aggravating factors. Therefore, on August 8, 1988, Judge Stephen Kahn sentenced Daniel Cook to death on both counts of first-degree murder. After the sentencing, Cook's case went through many years of appeals. This is the legal process where a convicted person asks higher courts to review their case for errors. Cook's lawyers filed a direct appeal with the Arizona Supreme Court. In 1991, that court upheld his conviction and death sentence. The court found no major mistakes in the trial. Cook's lawyers then filed appeals in federal court. They argued many things, including that Cook's trial lawyer had been ineffective and that his waiver of counsel was not valid. They also argued that the judge had not properly considered mitigating evidence. In 2008, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals also upheld Cook's conviction and sentence. All these appeals were rejected. The courts consistently found that Cook had received a fair trial and that the death penalty was appropriate for his crimes. In 2011, Cook was scheduled to be executed. But just one day before the execution, the United States Supreme Court stepped in and stopped it. The Supreme Court wanted to look at an argument that Cook's lawyers had not presented evidence of his horrific childhood abuse during his trial or sentencing. The lawyers argued that if this evidence had been presented, the judge might have decided to give Cook life in prison instead of death. The Supreme Court allowed Cook to make this argument. But after reviewing the case, the Supreme Court eventually dismissed the appeal. They decided that the issue did not change the outcome. The way was now clear for the execution to move forward. On August 8, 2012, exactly 24 years after he was sentenced to death, Daniel Wayne Cook was executed at the Arizona State Prison in Florence, Arizona. He was 51 years old. The execution method was lethal injection. The process began at 10:26 in the morning. Prison medical staff set up intravenous lines in Cook's arms. The witnesses watched through a closed-circuit television. Cook looked nervous and sad. He winced when the medical staff had trouble finding a vein in his right arm. They eventually succeeded in his left arm. The curtains were drawn open to the viewing room, and Cook spoke his last words. He said, "I'd like to say sorry to the victim's family. I know that's not enough." There was a long pause. Then he said, "Where am I?" He thanked his lawyers, though the audio was cut off at that point. His final words, which were reported by prison officials, were Red Robin Yum. "I'm done. I love you." After that, the lethal drug was administered. Cook's body went still, and his heart stopped. At 11:03 in the morning, a doctor entered the room and pronounced Daniel Wayne Cook dead. The entire execution process took 37 minutes. After the execution, the family of Kevin Swaney spoke to the media. 5 of Kevin's siblings had witnessed the execution. His sister Bridget Lester said that Cook's apology was hollow. She said he was only sorry because he got caught. His sister Lynn Petit said that Kevin had died alone and scared, so she did not feel sorry for Cook. However, Kevin's brother Sheen Stewart had a different reaction. He said he felt sorry for Cook. He said that the man he saw on the gurney was scared, and that no one should have to die alone. His other sisters disagreed with him and left the room. The family of Carlos Cruz Ramos did not make public statements. John Matsky, the accomplice who confessed and testified against Cook, served his 20-year sentence. He was released from prison in July 2007, 5 years before Cook was executed. He walked free, while Daniel Cook was put to death for the same crimes. This fact caused much pain for the victims' families, who could not understand why one killer served only 20 years while the other was executed. The story of Daniel Wayne Cook ended on that August morning in 2012. He went from a childhood of terrible abuse to a young adulthood of drug use and bad choices. Those choices led him to torture and kill 2 innocent people. The law caught up with him, and after a quarter of a century of appeals, he paid the ultimate price for his crimes. The victims, Carlos Cruz Ramos and Kevin Swaney, cannot come back. Their families are left with the memory of what was done to them. The execution brought a final ending to this long and tragic case, but it could never bring back the 2 young men whose lives were taken so brutally on that July night in 1987. Story 2. Michael Edward Hooper was born on July 9, 1972, in the state of Oklahoma. He was a white male with brown hair and gray eyes. His early life was marked by significant trauma. When he was still an infant, Michael was kidnapped. This was a frightening event that separated him from his mother. Later in his childhood, he experienced additional separations from his mother. These events created a stormy and troubled childhood for him. He did not have a stable or nurturing relationship with his mother growing up. His family life was not peaceful or supportive. As Michael grew older, he attended school. However, he faced serious difficulties in the classroom. He had learning disabilities that made it hard for him to keep up with other students. He became frustrated very easily because he could not understand things as quickly as others. This frustration often led to problems with his behavior. He had trouble controlling his impulses. When he started a project or a task, he struggled to finish it. He was also described as argumentative. These behavioral problems continued throughout his teenage years. During his teenage years, Michael started drinking alcohol. He also used other substances. This became a pattern in his life. His problems with anger and impulse control did not go away. He had difficulty coping with everyday problems and stressful situations. At some point, he received counseling to try to help with his anger issues. A psychologist named Dr. Russell Adams evaluated him in April of 1993. At that time, Dr. Adams found that Michael's cognitive functioning was largely adequate. His intelligence was measured as average. However, the tests also showed that Michael had emotional and psychological problems. He had trouble keeping his anger under control and dealing with ordinary problems. Dr. Adams noted that Michael had shown some improvement in his ability to stay controlled, but the problems were still there. Michael also had relationships with women. In 1989, he married a woman named Stephanie Duncan. Their marriage did not last long. They were only married for 8 months. Their relationship was described as unhappy and violent. Michael physically abused her on several occasions. He also threatened to kill her. During their marriage, Michael and Stephanie often visited a specific field in northwest Oklahoma City. This field was an area they went to regularly, but no one knew at the time why that place would later become important. In early 1992, Michael met a woman named Cynthia Lynn Jarman, who was called Cindy by her friends. They began dating. Their relationship quickly became violent. They fought often. On more than one occasion, Cindy called the police because of their fights. Both Michael and Cindy obtained protective orders against each other at different times. This meant they each went to court and asked for legal protection from the other person because of the violence in their relationship. Michael also threatened to kill Cindy on several occasions. She told her friends about these threats. She was afraid of him. Their relationship lasted through the summer of 1993. In July of 1993, Cindy began dating another man named Bill Stremlow. Bill Stremlow was actually a friend of Michael's. This made the situation more complicated and tense. In November of 1993, Cindy and her 2 young children moved into Bill Stremlow's home. Bill told Cindy that Michael was not welcome in their house. He did not want Michael coming around. Before Cindy moved in with Bill, she told a friend that Michael had previously threatened to kill her if she ever lived with another man. She was clearly worried about what Michael might do. Cindy had 2 children. Her daughter was named Tanya K. Jarman. She was 5 years old. Her son was named Timmy Glenn Jarman. He was 3 years old. Both children were young and innocent. They lived with their mother. Cindy worked as a cosmetologist. She was described as a beautiful person who was full of life. She was considered a very good mother to her children. Tanya was described as very smart for her age. Timmy was described as a bubbly and playful little boy. In December of 1993, Cindy was planning her life. She had moved in with Bill. She wanted to move forward. However, on December 6, 1993, Cindy confided in a friend. She told that friend that she wanted to see Michael Hooper one last time. After that, she planned to stop seeing him completely. She wanted to end their connection for good. This was her plan. She did not know that this decision would lead to disaster. On that same day or the next day, Michael showed a 9mm handgun to a neighbor. He had bought this gun several months earlier, in July of 1993. He had kept it with him ever since. He was very attached to it. Michael Hooper had a history of violence, threats, and unstable relationships. He had a troubled childhood. He had learning disabilities. He had problems with anger and impulse control. He abused alcohol and other substances. He had been violent with his ex-wife. He had been violent with his girlfriend Cindy. He had threatened to kill her multiple times. He had a gun. These factors would all come together very soon, but on December 6, 1993, no one knew what was about to happen. The day was just an ordinary day. On the morning of December 7, 1993, Cindy Jarman woke up and got her children ready for the day. She had to take her boyfriend Bill Stremlow to work. Bill did not have his truck that day because Cindy was using it. She drove Bill to his job and dropped him off. Then she had the truck for the rest of the day. She had Bill's only house key on her key ring along with the truck key. This meant Bill could not get back into his house until she returned. Cindy went about her day with the children. At 3:30 in the afternoon, she drove to Tanya's school to pick her up. Tanya got out of school at that time. Cindy was about 15 minutes late picking her up. Tanya's teacher saw the little girl get into Bill Stremlow's truck. The teacher noticed that Tanya sat down next to a white male who was not Bill Stremlow. The teacher did not recognize this man. That man was Michael Hooper. Cindy and the children were now with Michael. Later that evening, Cindy was supposed to pick Bill up from work. She never showed up. Bill waited for her, but she did not come. He had no way to get home because Cindy had his truck and his only house key. Bill had to borrow a key from his landlord just to get into his own house that night. He went home, but Cindy and the children were not there. He was worried and confused. Later that same night, Bill Stremlow's truck was found burning in a field in northwest Oklahoma City. Someone had set it on fire. The windows of the truck were broken out. An accelerant had been used to start the fire. This meant someone had poured a flammable liquid, probably gasoline, on the truck to make it burn faster. Bill recovered the truck the next day, but it was badly damaged. When Bill finally got back into his house on December 10th, he noticed something was wrong. There were no signs that anyone had broken in. The doors were not forced open. However, a dresser drawer had been disturbed. Someone had gone through it. A bottle of Jim Beam whiskey was sitting on the dresser. $10 in cash was missing. Bill had told Cindy that Michael Hooper was not welcome in their home. But later, Police found Michael Hooper's fingerprints on that Jim Beam whiskey bottle. Other evidence showed that Michael and Cindy drank that brand of whiskey together. Cindy and her 2 children were reported missing on December 9, 1993. 2 full days had passed since anyone had seen them. Police immediately began investigating. They tried to interview Michael Hooper. He refused to come to the police station. When officers finally spoke with him, he denied seeing Cindy for the past 6 months. He told them he had not been with her at all. But officers noticed that he appeared nervous. He also had a fresh scratch on his arm. He could not explain where it came from. Also on December 9th, a rancher was checking his property. He owned land in northwest Oklahoma City. He noticed that the gate leading into one of his fields had been damaged. This was not normal. He went inside the field to look around. What he found was disturbing. There was broken glass on the ground. There were tire tracks. He found a bloody sock lying on the ground. There was a pool of blood. The rancher did not know what had happened, but he knew something was very wrong. After hearing about the missing persons report on the news, the rancher called the police. He told them what he had found on his property. Police officers went to the field on December 10th to investigate. They searched the area carefully. They found broken glass. They found tire tracks. They found a footprint. They found shell casings on the ground. These shell casings came from a gun. They also found a child's bloody sock. Near a tree, they found a pool of blood. The tree had a freshly broken branch. A blue fiber was found near the tree. This fiber would later be connected to Tanya's jacket. The officers also found a shallow grave. Someone had dug a hole in the ground. The grave was covered with tree limbs, leaves, and other debris to hide it. The grave appeared to have been soaked with gasoline. When police opened the grave, they found the bodies of Cynthia Jarman, Tanya Jarman, and Timmy Jarman. They were buried on top of one another. The bodies had been in the ground for several days. The medical examiner examined the bodies. Each victim had been shot twice in the head or the face. Cynthia Jarman was shot twice. Tanya was shot twice. Timmy was shot twice. The wounds were consistent with 9mm ammunition. The bullets had not been recovered from the bodies, but the wounds matched that type of bullet. Each person had died from these gunshot wounds. Police looked more closely at the scene around the grave. They found a bullet embedded in a branch on top of the grave. The bullet had pinned a white fiber to the branch. The white fiber matched the lining of Tanya's jacket. Tanya's jacket was blue and purple on the outside and had white fiber lining inside. The branch appeared to have been broken from the tree near the pool of blood. This was evidence that Tanya had been near that tree before she died. The bullet in the branch had been fired from a 9mm handgun. Shell casings found near the blood pool were also from a 9mm weapon. There was a hole in the hood of Tanya's blue and purple jacket. The hole went through the blue fabric. White fibers from the lining stuck out through the hole. The hole appeared to have been caused by a small, hot object going through it. This was consistent with a bullet passing through the hood of her jacket. This matched the state's theory that Tanya had been running when someone shot at her. Police also found glass near the grave and near the damaged gate. This glass was consistent with broken glass found in Tanya's coat pocket. It was also consistent with the broken windows of Bill Stremlow's truck. This connected the burning truck to the crime scene. Police obtained an arrest warrant for Michael Hooper. They arrested him at his parents' home. When officers searched him, they found a 9mm bullet in his pocket. They also seized his tennis shoes. They photographed the scratch on his arm. Police then searched his parents' home where he was living. They found a 9mm handgun. This was the same weapon Michael had purchased in July of 1993. It had been confiscated by police during a traffic stop in July, but it was returned to him on October 23, 1993. Since then, he had kept it with him. Police also found other items in Michael's parents' home. They found 2 shovels. The soil on these shovels was consistent with the soil from the grave site. This meant the shovels had been used to dig the grave. They found 2 gas cans. These could have been used to carry the accelerant to burn the truck and soak the grave. They found broken glass that was consistent with the glass found in Tanya's coat and near the gate. The evidence was mounting. Forensic testing was done on the items police collected. The shell casings found at the crime scene were compared to bullets fired from Michael's gun. A ballistics expert determined that the shell casings from the scene matched the casings from Michael's weapon. This proved his gun was the one used in the murders. The 9mm bullet found embedded in the branch on the grave was also fired from his gun. Police compared the footprint found at the crime scene to Michael's tennis shoes. The print was similar to the shoes he was wearing. DNA tests were conducted on the blood found on his shoes. The tests showed that the blood on both of his shoes was consistent with Cynthia Jarman's blood. This placed Cindy's blood directly on Michael's shoes. He had been at the scene and had stepped in her blood. Michael's former wife, Stephanie Duncan, testified about something important. She said that she and Michael had visited the field where the bodies were found on several occasions. They had gone there together many times in the past. Michael was already familiar with this remote location. He knew exactly where it was and what it looked like. He had chosen this spot for a reason. Witnesses also came forward. A neighbor testified that Michael showed him a 9mm handgun on December 6th or December 7th, the day before and the day of the murders. A co-worker named Brett Blanton testified that Michael had the gun with him when they worked out of state in late October and November. Michael slept with the gun nearby. He cleaned it often. He refused to sell it when his co-worker offered to buy it. Michael was very attached to this weapon. The evidence showed that Michael Hooper took Cindy and her 2 children to that remote field. He shot Cindy first, twice in the head. Then he shot 3-year-old Timmy twice in the head. 5-year-old Tanya escaped from the truck and ran into the woods. Michael chased her. He fired 1 shot at her. The bullet went through the hood of her jacket and embedded in a tree branch. He caught up with her. He shot her twice in the head. Then he buried all 3 bodies in a shallow grave. He poured gasoline on the grave. He covered it with branches and leaves. He set Bill Stremlow's truck on fire in another field to destroy evidence. He went to Bill's house and took $10. He left a whiskey bottle with his fingerprints on it. He then went home and pretended nothing had happened. After the police arrested Michael Hooper at his parents' home, they held him in custody. The evidence they had collected was very strong. They had the murder weapon, which ballistics tests proved was used in the shootings. They had shell casings from the scene that matched the gun. They had a bullet from the scene that was fired from his gun. They had his fingerprints on a whiskey bottle inside Bill Stremlow's house. They had soil on his shovels that matched the grave. They had blood on his shoes that matched Cynthia Jarman's DNA. They had witnesses who placed him with the victims on the day of the murders. They had his own lies when he said he had not seen Cindy for 6 months. The case against him was solid. Michael Hooper went to trial in June of 1995. The trial was held in Canadian County, Oklahoma. The judge was Edward C. Cunningham. The prosecutors were Kathy Stocker and Michael Gahan. They presented all the evidence to the jury. They showed how Michael had planned this, how he had used his gun, how he had killed each victim, and how he had tried to hide the bodies and destroy evidence. The defense attorneys, Mitchell Lee and Richard Crow, tried to defend him. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was reasonable doubt. They tried to show that Michael might not have had enough time to commit the murders. But the jury did not believe the defense. After hearing all the testimony and seeing all the evidence, the jury found Michael Hooper guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was convicted of killing Cynthia Jarman, Tanya Jarman, and Timmy Jarman. The verdict was announced on the same day. Now the trial moved to the second phase, which was the sentencing phase. The jury had to decide whether Michael should receive the death penalty or life in prison. During the sentencing phase, The prosecutors presented evidence to prove aggravating factors. Aggravating factors are reasons why the crime is especially serious and deserves the death penalty. The jury found 2 aggravating factors applied to all 3 murders. First, Michael had created a great risk of death to more than one person. This was clearly true because he killed 3 people. Second, he was a continuing threat to society. This meant he was likely to commit more violent crimes in the future. The jury also found a third aggravating factor for the murder of Tanya. They found that Michael killed Tanya to avoid arrest or prosecution for killing her mother. She was a witness, and he murdered her to silence her. The defense attorneys tried to present mitigating evidence. Mitigating evidence is information that might make the jury feel the death penalty is too harsh. They called Michael's mother to testify. They tried to show his troubled childhood, his learning disabilities, and his psychological problems. They also called a psychologist, Dr. Philip Murphy. However, this part of the defense went very badly. Dr. Murphy had never examined Michael. He only reviewed another doctor's report. On the stand, he said he did not put much stock in his own conclusions. Then the prosecutors called Dr. Russell Adams, the psychologist who had actually examined Michael. Dr. Adams testified that Michael had no brain damage and had no trouble controlling his temper. This hurt the defense instead of helping it. The jury was not persuaded by the mitigating evidence. They recommended the death penalty for all 3 counts. On July 25, 1995, Judge Cunningham formally sentenced Michael Hooper to death. Michael Hooper then appealed his conviction and sentence. His attorneys argued that several errors had occurred during the trial. They said the arrest warrant and search warrant were not valid. They said some evidence should not have been admitted. They said the prosecutors made improper arguments. They said the victim impact evidence was too emotional. They also argued that the aggravating factors were not proven. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case carefully. They examined each claim. On November 7, 1997, they affirmed the conviction and the death sentences. They found no errors that required reversal. Michael then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but that court refused to hear his case in 1998. Michael then filed a post-conviction application in state court. This is a legal process where a convicted person can raise new issues that were not raised on direct appeal. He claimed his trial attorneys had been ineffective. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed his claims again. They denied his application on April 9, 1998. They found that most of his claims were already decided, and that his attorneys had not been ineffective in the ways he claimed. After exhausting his state court appeals, Michael filed a federal habeas corpus petition. This is a request to a federal court to review his case because his constitutional rights were violated. The Federal District Court in Oklahoma reviewed his case. On November 13, 2001, that court granted him relief. The court agreed with Michael that his trial attorneys had been ineffective during the sentencing phase. The court found that the way his attorneys handled the psychological evidence was a serious error. The defense attorneys had not properly investigated the mental health evidence. They had called Dr. Murphy without preparing him. They had not talked to Dr. Adams. Their presentation actually made things worse for Michael. The federal court ruled that this was ineffective assistance of counsel and threw out the death sentences. The state of Oklahoma appealed this decision to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. The 10th Circuit reviewed the case. On December 23, 2002, they affirmed the district court's decision. They agreed that Michael's attorneys had performed poorly in the sentencing phase. They said the attorneys made an unreasonable decision to present psychological evidence without investigating it properly. The result was disastrous for the defense. The federal court ordered that Michael be given a new sentencing hearing. The state could try again to get the death penalty, but Michael had to have a fair sentencing process. The case was sent back to the state court for resentencing. This hearing took place in 2004. During this time, Michael made a surprising decision. He decided he did not want to fight the death penalty anymore. He filed a motion asking for the death sentence to be upheld. He waived his right to a jury trial for the sentencing. He waived his right to present mitigating evidence. He told his attorneys not to call any witnesses or experts on his behalf. The trial court was very careful. Judge Cunningham ordered an independent mental health evaluation. Dr. R. Sean Roberson examined Michael and found him competent. Michael's own defense expert, Dr. Jeannie Russell, also examined him and found him competent. The judge questioned Michael many times. He asked if Michael understood what he was doing. Michael said yes. He understood the difference between life in prison and death. He understood that he was giving up his right to present evidence that might save his life. He still chose to waive those rights. The resentencing hearing was held on September 8th and September 30th, 2004. The judge reviewed all the evidence from the original trial. He also reviewed a written proffer of mitigating evidence that Michael's attorneys had prepared, even though Michael would not let them present it. The judge found all the same aggravating factors that the original jury had found. He found that Michael had created a great risk of death to more than one person. He found that Michael was a continuing threat to society. He found that Tanya's murder was committed to avoid arrest or prosecution. The judge then weighed the aggravating factors against the mitigating evidence. He found that the aggravating factors outweighed the mitigating factors. On October 27, 2004, Judge Cunningham formally sentenced Michael Hooper to death on all 3 counts. Michael then waived his right to appeal this new sentence. He told the judge he did not want to challenge it. However, Michael later changed his mind. He began taking antidepressant medication in 2005. He started to feel differently about his decision. He then tried to appeal the death sentence. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals heard his case. They reviewed whether he had been competent to waive his rights in 2004. They found that he was competent. They noted that both the state expert and the defense expert had found him competent at the time. His depression did not prevent him from understanding his choices. The court affirmed the death sentences on August 3, 2006. Michael then filed another federal habeas petition. He argued that his waiver of appeal was not valid. The federal district court reviewed the case. On May 19, 2011, they denied his petition. They found that the state court's decision was reasonable. Michael requested a certificate of appealability from the 10th Circuit. On September 2, 2011, the 10th Circuit denied his request. They said his claims were not debatable. The court found that both experts and his own attorneys believed he was competent in 2004. The fact that he changed his mind later did not mean he was incompetent before. The legal appeals were now over. Michael Hooper had no more options. The state of Oklahoma scheduled his execution. He would be put to death by lethal injection. Lethal injection involves giving a prisoner a series of drugs that stop the heart. The execution was set for August 14, 2012. In the weeks before his execution, Michael tried one last legal move. His attorney, Jim Drummond, filed a lawsuit. They claimed that Oklahoma's 3-drug lethal injection method was unconstitutional. They argued that if the first drug, which is a sedative, did not work properly, the other drugs would cause great pain. This would be cruel and unusual punishment. They asked the court to force the state to have extra doses of the sedative on hand. A federal judge rejected this request. A federal appeals court upheld that ruling. The United States Supreme Court also rejected his request without any explanation. The execution would proceed. On August 14, 2012, Michael Edward Hooper was executed at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma. He was 40 years old. He had spent nearly 19 years on death row. Before his execution, he was given his last meal. He requested a small cranberry juice, a small coffee, a small portion of blackberries, a small portion of cherries, strawberries, a peach, an apricot, a plum, a pear, an apple, a banana, and an orange. At 6:08 p.m., the warden asked if Michael had any last words. Michael spoke. He thanked God for a good send-off. He thanked his family for standing by him. He asked for forgiveness from anyone who needed to forgive him. He asked that his spirit be released into the hands of Jesus. He told his family he loved them. His mother said amen. Then the execution began. The lethal drugs were administered. Michael looked at his family one last time and said, "I love you all." His eyes fluttered and closed. At 6:14 p.m., the attending physician pronounced him dead. 15 members of the victim's family witnessed the execution. Michael's mother, brother, and 2 clergy members also watched. After the execution, the victim's family released a written statement. They offered their sincere condolences to Michael's family. They said that this had been a long and arduous journey for all the families. They said they hoped to close this chapter in their lives. They stated that Tanya, Timmy, and Cindy would always be in their hearts and minds, and they would forever be missed and loved deeply. On that evening, Michael Edward Hooper's life ended. The justice system had run its course from the arrest in 1993 to the execution in 2012. The families of Cynthia, Tanya, and Timmy Jarman could finally close that painful chapter, though the loss of their loved ones would remain with them forever. Story 3. Donald L. Duke Palmer Jr. was born on February 11, 1965, in the state of Ohio. He was born into a family that had many problems from the start. His father, Donald Palmer Sr., was present when Donald was born, but he did not stay in the home for long. During Donald's early childhood, his father left the family. This meant Donald grew up without a father figure in his daily life. He had no older man to guide him or teach him how to handle problems. Donald's mother had a very difficult life as well. After Donald's father left, his mother married again. In fact, she married 3 different men over the years. None of these marriages lasted or provided a stable home for Donald. His mother also developed an addiction to prescription drugs. This meant she was not always able to take care of her children properly. The home was not a calm or safe place for Donald to grow up. He did not receive the love, attention, or structure that children need to develop well. Because of the unstable home environment, Donald started using drugs himself at a very young age. He did not have good role models to show him how to make healthy choices. Instead, he followed a path that led him into drug use early in his life. This habit would continue with him as he grew older. Donald went to school like other children, but the records do not say much about his education. We do know that later in life, a doctor would test his intelligence and find that he was of average intelligence. This meant he was able to understand right from wrong. He was not a person with a mental disability that prevented him from knowing what was legal and what was not. As Donald became a young man, his life continued to be troubled. He married a woman named Cammie. They had children together, including at least 1 daughter. However, the marriage did not succeed. Donald and Cammie eventually divorced. The divorce caused Donald a great deal of emotional pain. After the divorce, he did not see his children as often as he wanted. This loss bothered him deeply. Donald also had a sister. The records show that she was part of his life during his adult years. He sometimes spent time with her and helped her with things like cashing her Social Security disability checks. He also had friends, including a man named Edward Hill, who would become a close companion. Donald and Edward spent time together and did things like driving around and visiting different places. During his adult years, Donald did not have a steady or successful career. Instead, he became involved in selling cocaine. This was a legal activity, and it showed that Donald was willing to break the law for money. However, before the events that would later change his life, Donald did not have a significant criminal record. He had not been convicted of serious crimes in the past. He had not spent time in prison for violent offenses. In terms of his personality, Donald had emotional problems. A doctor later examined him and said that he had a borderline personality disorder. This condition meant that Donald experienced intense emotions. He could have sudden bursts of anger. He had trouble controlling his feelings in stressful situations. This was a problem that had likely been building since his difficult childhood. By the time Donald was in his early 20s, he had already been through a lot. He had grown up without a father. He had watched his mother struggle with addiction and failed marriages. He had started using drugs as a child and continued into adulthood. He had married and divorced. He had children he could not see regularly. He had no stable career and was selling drugs to make money. He also had a personality disorder that made his emotions hard to control. His life was filled with instability, loss, and poor decisions. All of these experiences shaped who Donald was. They did not make him a bad person from the start, but they set him on a path where he often made bad choices. He did not have the support system or the coping skills that many people have. He was a man with many inner struggles. He carried anger, sadness, and confusion inside him. These feelings were always present, even when he seemed calm on the outside. As he reached the age of 24, Donald was still living in Ohio. He continued to associate with his friend Edward Hill. He continued to use drugs and alcohol. His life was not going in a positive direction. He had not found a way to heal from his childhood or his failed marriage. He was still searching for something, but he did not know what it was. His days were spent driving around, seeing friends, and dealing with his own emotional pain. He had no idea that his choices would soon lead him into a situation that would destroy his life and the lives of others. On May 7, 1989, Donald Palmer was 24 years old. He was still living in Ohio and spending a great deal of time with his friend Edward Allen Hill. On that day, Donald, his sister, and Edward left Columbus, Ohio, and drove to a town called Martins Ferry in Belmont County. Donald later said the reason for this trip was to pick up his sister's Social Security disability check. This was a routine errand, but it set in motion a chain of events that would lead to murder. The next morning, May 8, 1989, Donald and Edward took Donald's sister to cash her disability check. After they helped her with this task, they dropped her off somewhere. Now Donald and Edward were alone together in Edward's vehicle. Edward was driving a brown Dodge Charger. They began driving in the area near a residence belonging to a man named George Gooley. George Gooley was an important person to Donald because Gooley had been dating Donald's ex-wife, Cammie. Donald was still upset about his divorce, and the fact that his ex-wife was now with another man made him angry. It is not completely clear why Donald wanted to go to Gooley's house that day, but the two men drove back and forth in front of the house multiple times. They were staking out the home. At the same time, a 43-year-old man named Charles Sponholtz was in the area. Charles was keeping an eye on George Gooley's house for his own reasons. He noticed Donald and Edward's vehicle driving back and forth in a suspicious manner. Charles was driving his own pickup truck. At some point, Charles slowed his vehicle down. Edward, who was driving the Dodge Charger, hit the back of Charles's pickup truck. The collision was not severe, but it was enough to stop both vehicles. Charles Sponholtz got out of his truck. He was upset about the accident. He walked toward Edward Hill and yelled, "What in the hell are you trying to prove?" This was a natural reaction to being hit by another vehicle. Edward Hill also got out of the Dodge Charger, and an argument started between the two men. At this point, Donald Palmer was still in the passenger seat of Edward's vehicle. Donald got out of the car. He was holding a .22 caliber single-action revolver in his hand. He had already been using drugs and alcohol that day. He was drunk and high. Earlier, before the accident, he had been firing his gun out the window of the car for no clear reason. The gun was already loaded and ready to fire. When Donald got out of the car, he saw that Charles and Edward were arguing. Charles Sponholtz had grabbed Edward Hill. Donald walked over to them. He did not try to stop the argument peacefully. Instead, he used the gun he was holding. According to Donald's later statements, he either hit Charles with the gun or the gun accidentally went off. However, the type of gun he was using made an accident very unlikely. The .22 caliber revolver was a single-action weapon. This meant that to fire it, a person had to first pull back the hammer with his thumb and then pull the trigger. Each time a person wanted to shoot, he had to cock the hammer again. This was not a gun that could fire by itself. Donald had to purposely cock and fire each round. The first shot hit Charles Sponholtz in the left side of his head. Charles fell to the ground. Donald was not finished. Edward Hill then yelled, "Kill him, kill him!" Donald listened to Edward. He cocked the hammer again and fired a second shot into Charles's head. Donald later told a deputy sheriff that he shot Charles a second time to make sure he was dead. Charles Sponholtz died at the scene. After Charles was dead, Donald took Charles's wallet. He removed the money and anything else of value. This was an act of robbery. The two men then began to move Charles's body. They lifted the body and placed it into the bed of Charles's own pickup truck. They did this because they did not want the body to be easily found on the road. While Donald and Edward were lifting Charles's body into the truck, another car appeared on the road. A 41-year-old man named Stephen Vargo was driving by. Stephen was a married father who had only been married to his wife for 2 months. He was a kind man who often helped people. He saw the accident scene and stopped his vehicle behind Edward's Dodge Charger. He got out and walked toward the two men. He did not know what had happened. He asked them, "What the hell did you guys do?" This was a normal question from someone who had just seen a crash. Donald turned around and saw Stephen Vargo. He made a quick decision. He believed that Stephen had witnessed the first shooting. Donald was afraid that Stephen would tell the police what he had seen. Instead of explaining or running away, Donald decided to kill Stephen too. He pointed his .22 revolver at Stephen and fired once. The bullet hit Stephen in the left side of his head. Stephen did not die immediately. Donald cocked the hammer again and fired a second shot into Stephen's head. This second shot was fired from point-blank range, meaning Donald was standing very close to him. The bullet entered the right side of Stephen's head. Stephen Vargo died on the road. After killing Stephen, Donald and Edward had to decide what to do with both bodies. They left Stephen Vargo's body, right where it fell, on the road. They drove away in Charles Sponholtz's pickup truck, which now carried Charles's dead body in the bed. They drove about 1 mile away from the shooting scene and stopped in a field. They dumped Charles's body there and left the truck parked in the field. Then they returned to Edward's Dodge Charger and drove back to Columbus, Ohio. On the way back, Donald and Edward stopped to hide evidence. They had taken wallets and personal items from both victims. They hid these items so that the victims could not be identified right away. Donald also needed to get rid of the murder weapon. He took the .22 caliber revolver and threw it into the water near the Hoover Reservoir, which is close to Columbus. He thought the gun would never be found. During the entire sequence of events, Donald and Edward had been noticed by other people. Earlier in the day, Sergeant John Hawthorne, a sheriff's deputy, had stopped their vehicle near a hotel parking lot. Their parking lights were on, and it looked suspicious. The officer ran the license plate and found it was Edward's car. He questioned them, but did not find any illegal activity at that moment, so he let them go. Later in the day, 2 gas station attendants saw Donald and Edward acting suspiciously at their station. The attendants thought the men looked like they were about to rob the place. They were so worried that they wrote down the license plate number of Edward's brown Dodge Charger. These observations would later become important, but at the time, no one knew that 2 men had just been murdered. Donald and Edward believed they had gotten away with the killings. They had left the bodies in separate locations. They had thrown away the gun. They had hidden the victims' wallets. They had returned to Columbus and went back to their normal routines. However, they had made many mistakes. The bodies would be discovered soon. People had seen their vehicle. The police would begin to connect the dots. But on that day, May 8, 1989, Donald Palmer had committed 2 brutal murders and an armed robbery, and he thought he was safe. The bodies of Charles Spanholtz and Stephen Vargo were discovered on May 8, 1989, the same day the murders happened. Police officers in Belmont County responded to the scene. They found Stephen Vargo's body lying in the middle of the road. His wallet and personal items were missing. About 1 mile away, they found Charles Spanholtz's pickup truck parked in a field. Charles's body was in the bed of the truck. His wallet was also missing. The police immediately knew they were dealing with a serious crime. They began to gather evidence and talk to witnesses. The police received important information from several sources. First, a gas station attendant contacted them. The attendant had seen a brown Dodge Charger at the gas station on the day of the murders. The 2 men in the car had acted very suspiciously. The attendant was so worried that he wrote down the license plate number. The plate was registered to Edward Allen Hill. This was a significant clue because a brown Dodge Charger had also been seen leaving the scene of the murders in a hurried and reckless manner. Second, Sergeant John Hawthorne remembered the traffic stop he had made earlier that morning. He had stopped a brown Dodge Charger near a hotel parking lot because the car looked suspicious. He had run the plates and found they belonged to Edward Hill. When he heard about the murders and the vehicle description, he made a connection. He told his supervisors about the stop. The police now had 2 pieces of evidence linking the brown Charger to the crime scene. Third, the police found physical evidence at the scene. They discovered fingerprints and shoe prints in the bed of Charles Spanholtz's pickup truck. Later, they would match these prints to Edward Hill. This was strong physical proof that Edward had been involved in moving the body. The police began looking for Edward Hill and Donald Palmer. On May 15, 1989, Donald called a police officer named Fred Thompson. Donald asked the officer if he was a suspect in the homicides. This was a strange question. If Donald was innocent, he would not have needed to ask. During this phone call, Donald told the officer that he and Edward Hill had been in Belmont County on May 7th and 8th. He also said he was missing a .22 caliber pistol, which was the same type of gun used in the shootings. At the end of the conversation, Donald gave the officer Edward's telephone number. This was a major mistake on Donald's part. He had just linked himself and Edward to the murders. The next day, May 16th, 1989, Officer Fred Thompson drove to Columbus, Ohio. He located Donald and Edward at Donald's residence. He asked them to come to the police station for questioning. They agreed to go. Once at the station, the police asked Edward Hill to talk about what had happened. Edward gave a statement that placed him near the crime scene, but when he learned he was a suspect, he stopped talking. He asked for a lawyer and refused to answer more questions. This was his right under the law. Then the police questioned Donald Palmer. This time, Donald confessed. He told the police everything that had happened on May 8, 1989. He admitted that he had shot Charles Spanholtz twice in the head. He admitted that he had shot Stephen Vargo twice in the head. He told the police where the gun was. He said he had thrown it into the water near Hoover Reservoir. He also told them that Edward Hill had helped him. He explained that Edward was driving the car when they hit Charles's truck. He said Edward yelled, kill him," after the first shot. He said Edward helped load Charles's body into the truck. He said Edward helped hide the victims' wallets. Donald's confession was detailed and matched the physical evidence. After hearing Donald's confession, the police questioned Edward Hill again. Edward still refused to talk. However, during a ride from one county to another, Edward made a decision to help the police. He told officers that he knew where the victims' wallets and other evidence were hidden. He led the police to the location. They found the wallets, personal items, and spent shell casings. The evidence was recovered, and it connected both men to the crime. The police arrested Donald Palmer and Edward Hill. Donald was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of aggravated robbery, and various other charges. The case went to trial in October 1989. Donald's trial was held first. He was tried separately from Edward. The trial took place in Belmont County Common Pleas Court, with Judge Charles F. Knapp presiding. During the trial, the prosecutors presented a strong case. They introduced Donald's confession to the police. They presented testimony from law enforcement officers, including Sergeant Hawthorne and Officer Thompson. They brought in Sheriff Thomas McCourt, who explained how the .22 caliber single-action revolver worked. He testified that the gun could not fire accidentally because the hammer had to be pulled back each time. This directly contradicted Donald's claim that the first shot was an accident. They also brought in Deputy David Taylor. He testified that Donald had told him during a suicide watch that he shot Charles to make sure he was dead. This was a very damaging statement because it showed Donald's intent to kill. Donald testified in his own defense. He told the jury that he did not plan to kill anyone. He said he was drunk and high on drugs. He claimed that he did not remember pulling the trigger. He said the first shot was an accident. He said the second shot was fired in a state of panic and confusion. He claimed that he shot Stephen Vargo because everything happened so fast. However, the physical evidence did not support his story. The type of gun required deliberate action for each shot. The placement of the wounds showed that Donald had aimed carefully. The fact that he shot both victims twice in the head proved that he intended to kill them. On October 13, 1989, the jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts. They found Donald Palmer guilty of the aggravated murders of Charles Sponholtz and Stephen Vargo. They also found him guilty of aggravated robbery. After the guilt phase, the trial moved to the penalty phase. The jury had to decide whether Donald should be sentenced to death or to life in prison. The defense presented evidence about Donald's difficult childhood, his lack of a significant criminal record, and his drug and alcohol problems. They argued that his life should be spared. The prosecution argued that the murders were brutal and cold-blooded. They pointed out that Donald had killed 2 innocent men for no good reason. He had shot Charles Sponholtz in the head twice. He had shot Stephen Vargo, a good Samaritan who had only stopped to help, twice in the head. He had done this to avoid being identified. The prosecution also argued that Donald had shown no remorse at the time of the crimes. He had thrown the gun away and tried to hide evidence. The jury deliberated and decided that the aggravating circumstances outweighed the mitigating factors. They recommended the death penalty. On October 26, 1989, Judge Charles F. Knapp sentenced Donald Palmer to death. Donald was sent to death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was 24 years old. He would spend the next 23 years on death row. Edward Hill was tried separately. His trial took place after Donald's. The evidence against Edward included his fingerprints and shoe prints on Charles Sponholtz's truck. It also included his confession about hiding the evidence. The jury convicted Edward of his role in the murders. On February 6, 1990, Judge Jennifer Sargas sentenced Edward Hill to 35 years to life in prison. He was not given the death penalty because he had not fired the gun. Donald Palmer did not give up. He appealed his conviction and death sentence. His case went to the Ohio Court of Appeals. He made many arguments. He said the trial court had made errors. He said the jury instructions were wrong. He said the prosecutor had misbehaved during the trial. He said his lawyers had not done a good job. The Court of Appeals reviewed all of his arguments. On August 29, 1996, they rejected his appeal and affirmed his conviction and death sentence. Donald then appealed to the Supreme Court of Ohio. That court reviewed his case as well. On December 24, 1997, they also affirmed the conviction and death sentence. Donald then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but that court refused to hear his case. His direct appeals were over. Donald did not stop there. He filed a petition for post-conviction relief in state court. He argued that his lawyers had been ineffective. The state courts rejected this petition. He also filed a federal habeas corpus petition in United States District Court. This is a type of appeal that allows a prisoner to challenge his conviction based on constitutional violations. The district court rejected his petition. He then appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. On June 5, 2009, the Sixth Circuit also rejected his appeal. All of his legal options had been exhausted. In 2012, the state of Ohio scheduled Donald's execution for September 20th. Donald made an unusual decision. He refused to request mercy from the Ohio Parole Board. He also refused to ask the governor for clemency. He told people that he deserved to die for what he had done. He said, "I killed 2 people. I've always accepted responsibility for the taking of their lives. I believe in justice." On the morning of September 20th, 2012, Donald Palmer was 47 years old. He was transported to the state prison in Lucasville, Ohio. He spent his final hours visiting with his children, his former wife, his attorney, and his spiritual advisor. He watched television, listened to the radio, and talked on the phone with friends. He wrote in a journal that was later given to his daughter. He also wrote some letters. He remained calm throughout the day. For his last meal, Donald requested a chipped ham and Velveeta cheese sandwich with fresh tomatoes, wheat bread, mayonnaise, ranch-flavored Doritos, peanut M&Ms, hazelnut ice cream, cheesecake, and a soda. He ate the meal before his execution. At 10 a.m., Donald was brought into the death chamber. He was strapped to a table with his arms outstretched. The execution team inserted needles into his arms. The curtains opened so witnesses could see him. In the witness room were several people: Tiffany Namath, Charles Sponholtz's widow, his 2 daughters, Charlene Farkas and Tiffany Sponholtz-Bew, his niece, Valerie Vargo Jolliffe, Stephen Vargo's widow, and a family friend. On the other side, 2 clergymen and Donald's attorney watched on his behalf. Media witnesses and prison officials also watched. An attendant held a microphone near Donald's mouth and asked if he had any last words. Donald turned his head toward the families. He said, "To the Vargo and Sponholtz families, I want you to know I have carried you in my heart for years and years. I'm sorry for what I took from you. The Lord has taken from me what I took from you. I know what it is like to lose a parent, sibling, and child. I wish I could bring it back to you, but I can't. I hope the pain and hurt die with me here today. May God bless you and give you good lives. I'm sorry." Then Donald turned away. The execution began. The drugs were injected into his arms. At 10:35 a.m., a medic pronounced Donald Palmer dead. After the execution, the family members spoke to the press. Tiffany Sponholtz-Bew, Charles's daughter, said that she finally had closure after 23 years. She said that nothing could bring back her father, but she felt a weight had been taken off her shoulders. Valerie Vargo Jolliffe, Stephen's widow, said she was glad justice had been served for her late husband. She also said that Donald's apology should have come a long time ago. Tiffany Namath, Charles's widow, said she felt the case had finally come to an end. Donald Palmer's body was cremated at state expense. His ashes were given to his family. His co-defendant, Edward Hill, remained in prison serving his 35 years to life sentence. Donald had tried to help Edward before his execution. He wrote a declaration to the parole board saying that Edward was innocent of the murders. He said Edward did not know he would shoot anyone, but the prosecutor questioned whether Donald could be believed. Donald had told different versions of the story over the years. In the end, Edward's sentence was not changed. Donald L. Duke Palmer Jr. was executed by lethal injection on September 20th, 2012 at 10:35 a.m., bringing a final end to the case of two senseless murders on a rural Ohio road. Story 4. Robert Wayne Harris was born on February 28, 1972, in Dallas County, Texas. He was a black male. His parents were together after he was born, but when Robert was 8 years old, a terrible event happened in his home. His father killed his mother. Robert saw this happen with his own eyes. This was a very painful and confusing experience for a young boy. It stayed with him for the rest of his life. After his mother died, Robert's childhood became very difficult. He did not behave well in school. Between the ages of 8 and 14, he was placed in special education classes. These classes were for children who had emotional and behavioral problems. In school, Robert often got into physical fights with his teachers and with other students. He was diagnosed with a condition called aggressive conduct disorder. This meant he had a pattern of acting out in violent and hostile ways. When Robert was 15 years old, his behavior got worse. He went to a local mall and assaulted a store clerk. He also broke into his aunt's house and stole several items, including a gun. When his aunt found out about the burglary, she reported it to the police. Robert became very angry at his aunt for reporting him. He took a hammer and struck her on the back of the head. He hit her so hard that the hammer actually broke from the force of the blow. For this crime, Robert was sent to the Texas Youth Commission. He stayed there for 2 years. While he was there, doctors again diagnosed him with aggressive conduct disorder. When Robert was 17 years old, he started selling crack cocaine. This was an illegal drug. He was making money from this activity, but it also put him in more trouble with the law. At the age of 18, he was convicted of 3 separate burglaries. He was also convicted of evading arrest. In addition, he was charged with unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. The court put him on probation, but he did not follow the rules. He ran away from a residential treatment program he was supposed to attend. Because he left without permission, the court revoked his probation. He was sent to prison for 8 years. Life in prison was not easy for Robert. He spent most of his time in administrative segregation. This was a special unit for prisoners who caused a lot of problems. While he was inside, he continued to behave badly. He set fire to his own cell. He threatened to kill prison staff members. He assaulted both staff and other inmates. He also dealt drugs inside the prison, refused to follow orders from officers, and engaged in sexual misconduct. Prison officials placed him in a program called the Program for the Aggressive Mentally Ill Offender. This program was meant to help inmates with violent tendencies. However, Robert did not cooperate with the program. Eventually, the program discharged him because he would not follow its rules. During this time, Robert also developed a bad stutter. His speech was very difficult to understand. Later, one of his lawyers would suggest that the stutter started because of the trauma of seeing his mother killed. The lawyer also believed that Robert's mental problems were made worse by that early experience. Robert was released from prison in May 1999. He was 27 years old. In June of that same year, he was completely discharged from supervision. He was free. After his release, Robert tried to build a normal life. He found a place to live and had a roommate. He got a driver's license and owned a car. He opened a checking account at a bank. He had a girlfriend and also had a few friends he spent time with. He did odd jobs to make money and was able to manage his daily life. At one point, he even started his own small lawn care business and made business cards for it. In May 1999, the same month he was released from prison, Robert got a job at a place called the Meaty Fine Car Wash in Irving, Texas. He worked there washing cars and helping customers. He held this job for about 10 months. He had friends outside of work, such as Junior Herrera and Billy Brooks. He also had an old girlfriend from his past, though they were no longer together. Robert seemed to have some stability in his life. He had a job, a place to stay, friends, and basic skills like reading and writing. He could write letters and fill out forms. However, his past was filled with violence, anger, and trouble with the law. The behaviors he showed as a child and a teenager had never truly gone away. On Wednesday, March 15, 2000, Robert Harris went to work at the Fine car wash like any other day. That morning, while on the job, he exposed himself inappropriately in front of a female customer. He masturbated while she could see him. The customer was shocked and upset. She immediately reported what happened to a manager at the car wash. Another worker also called the police. The police arrived and arrested Harris right there at the car wash. Because of this incident, the car wash management fired him from his job. He had worked there for about 10 months, but now he was out of work and had been arrested for a sex crime. Harris was released from police custody after the arrest. He was angry about being fired. He also knew that on Monday mornings, the car wash safe would have a lot of money inside. He had learned this while working there. An armored car came to pick up the cash every day except Sunday. That meant the safe held all the weekend receipts on Monday morning. The cash register also had $200 to $300 for making change. Harris decided to go back to the car wash and take that money. He also wanted to get back at the people who had fired him. On Sunday, March 19th, Harris spent the day with his friend Junior Herrera. Herrera sold cars and was driving a car from the dealership lot. Harris owned his own car, but he asked Herrera if he could borrow the dealership car instead. Herrera agreed and let Harris take the car. That evening, Harris drove to the home of another friend named Billy Brooks. When he got there, he asked Brooks if he could borrow a gun. Brooks did not have a gun himself, so he contacted his stepson Dion Bell. Bell had a handgun, and he agreed to lend it to Harris. Harris now had a borrowed car and a borrowed gun. The next morning, Monday, March 20th, Harris woke up early. He drove the borrowed car to the car wash. He arrived at about 7:15 a.m. The car wash was not open for business yet. Only a few employees were inside getting ready to start the day. Harris entered the building. He found the manager, Dennis Lee, who was 48 years old. He also found the assistant manager, Augustin Villasenor, who was 36 years old. And he found the cashier, Rhoda Wheeler, who was 46 years old. Harris forced all three of them into the office at gunpoint. Inside the office, Harris told Rhoda Wheeler to open the safe. She was scared and did what he said. She opened the safe and gave him all the cash that was inside. Harris took the money. Then he ordered all three victims to lie down on the floor. They obeyed. Harris stood over them and shot each one in the back of the head. He fired the gun from very close range. He also took a knife and slit Dennis Lee's throat. All three of them died from their injuries. Harris was not finished yet. He had not left the building when three more employees arrived for work. These workers had no idea what had happened inside. They walked in and were immediately confronted by Harris. He forced them to kneel down on the floor in the lobby area. Then he shot each of them in the back of the head at close range, just like the first three. One of these three employees was Benjamin Villasenor, who was 32 years old and the brother of Augustin. He died from his wounds. Another was Roberto Jimenez Jr., who was only 15 years old. He also died. The third employee was wounded, but did not die. However, the gunshot caused permanent damage to his body and brain. He would be disabled for the rest of his life. A seventh employee arrived a short time later. His name was Jason Shields. He walked in and saw the three bodies lying in the lobby. He also saw Harris standing near the cash register. Shields was terrified. Harris tried to lie to him. He told Shields that he had just discovered the bodies himself and that he was not the killer. While they were talking, Harris pulled a knife from a nearby bookshelf. Shields saw the knife and became very nervous. He told Harris that he needed to step outside to get some fresh air. Shields quickly walked out of the building and ran to a nearby donut shop. He called 911 from the donut shop to report what he had seen. Harris followed Shields to the donut shop. He also spoke briefly to the 911 operator. Then he fled the scene on foot. Harris walked away from the donut shop and went back to where he had parked the borrowed car. He drove the car back to his friend Junior Herrera. When he returned the car, he told Herrera a lie. He said that he had discovered some dead bodies at the car wash. He did not admit that he had killed anyone. He then took a taxi to Billy Brooks's house. At Brooks's house, Harris took the money he had stolen and separated it from the other items he was carrying. He then got rid of some metal lock boxes, the knife he had used, a crowbar, and pieces of a cell phone. He threw these items into a wooded area so that they could not be found easily. After hiding the evidence, Harris went to buy new clothes. He then checked into a motel room. He also sent Billy Brooks to a store to buy him a gold cross necklace. Harris spent the rest of that day in the motel. Later that afternoon, he drove to the home of another friend. He stayed there through the night. By this time, he had taken about $4,000 from the car wash safe. In addition to these murders, Harris had committed another murder several months earlier. In November 1999, a woman named Sandra Scott was alive and living in Irving. Harris knew her. One day, he believed that Sandra had taken $200 from his wallet. He became very angry about this. He decided to punish her. He abducted her and then killed her. He disposed of her body in a remote area. No one knew where she was. Her family reported her missing, but her remains were not found at that time. Harris had told no one about what he had done to Sandra Scott. He kept this secret for months. During the car wash attack, some people did notice things that seemed wrong. Jason Shields had seen the bodies and called the police. The police were already on their way to the scene when Harris fled. However, at that moment, the police did not know who the killer was. They had not yet arrested Harris. Shields had described the man he saw, and the 911 operator had spoken to Harris briefly, but the full picture was not yet clear. The investigation had not yet begun in earnest. Harris was still free. Jason Shields ran to the donut shop and called 911. The police received his call and immediately sent officers to the Meaty-Fine Car Washington. When the officers arrived, they walked inside and found the bodies of 5 people lying on the floor. The scene was shocking. There was blood everywhere. The police secured the area and began their investigation. They also spoke to Jason Shields, who described the man he had seen inside the car wash. Shields told them that the man had claimed to have just discovered the bodies, but Shields had seen him standing near the cash register and had watched him pull out a knife. The police now had a description of the suspect. The police also learned from the car wash management that a former employee named Robert Wayne Harris had been fired just a few days earlier. They discovered that Harris had been arrested on March 15th for exposing himself to a female customer. The management told the police that Harris knew the car wash schedule, including when the safe would contain money. This information made Harris a very strong suspect. The police began searching for him. They tracked Harris to a friend's house. On Tuesday, March 21st, 2000, the police went to that house and arrested Harris. He was taken into custody without any major struggle. Once he was at the police station, officers read him his legal rights. Harris understood these rights and agreed to speak with them. He gave a written statement denying any involvement at first. However, the police noticed that his story did not match the physical evidence they had collected at the crime scene. They questioned him again about the inconsistencies. This time, Harris changed his story. He wrote a second, longer statement in his own handwriting. In this statement, he confessed to killing the 5 people at the car wash. He He described exactly what he had done. He signed the confession and initialed each page. After confessing to the car wash murders, Harris then spoke about another crime. He told the police that he had killed a woman named Sandra Scott several months earlier, in November 1999. He explained that he believed she had taken $200 from his wallet, so he abducted her and killed her. He then agreed to show the police where he had disposed of her body. On March 22nd, Harris led the officers to a remote field in the Trinity River floodplain. The area was overgrown with weeds and littered with trash. There, hidden in the brush, the police found the remains of Sandra Scott. Her body had been decomposing in the open air for about 4 months. Harris had kept this secret the entire time, and now he had led the police right to her. The police gathered all the evidence from the car wash, from Harris's confession, and from the discovery of Sandra Scott's remains. The case against Harris was very strong. He had admitted to everything. He was charged with capital murder for the deaths of Augustin Villasenor and Rhoda Wheeler. The prosecutors chose to try him specifically for those 2 killings, even though he had killed 5 people that day. The other 3 car wash deaths and the murder of Sandra Scott were not part of the trial, but they were mentioned as part of his criminal history. Harris's trial began in September 2000 in Dallas County. The jury listened to all the evidence, including his written confession and the testimony of witnesses like Jason Shields. The defense lawyers did not argue that Harris was innocent. They knew the evidence was overwhelming. Instead, they focused on trying to get him a life sentence. They argued that Harris had been provoked when a coworker called him a pervert after the incident with the female customer. They also presented evidence about his mental problems and his difficult childhood. The jury did not accept this argument. They deliberated for only 11 minutes before finding Harris guilty of capital murder. The trial then moved to the punishment phase. Under Texas law, the jury had to decide if Harris would be dangerous in the future and if there were any mitigating factors that should spare his life. The prosecutors presented Harris's long history of violence, including his previous prison terms, his assault on his aunt, and his violent behavior behind bars. They also told the jury that Harris had planned to drive to Florida on the day he was arrested to kill an old girlfriend. This showed that he was still a danger to others. The jury answered the questions in favor of the death penalty. The judge sentenced Robert Wayne Harris to death by lethal injection. After the trial, Harris began the appeals process. His lawyers filed a direct appeal with the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. In February 2003, that court affirmed his conviction and sentence. His lawyers then appealed to the United States Supreme Court, but in October 2003, the Supreme Court denied his request for review. Harris also filed a state habeas corpus petition, which was denied. He then filed a federal habeas petition. In his federal appeals, his lawyers argued that he was mentally retarded and should not be executed under a Supreme Court ruling that banned the execution of people with mental retardation. They also argued that prosecutors had unfairly removed black jurors from his trial jury because of their race. Both arguments were rejected by the courts. In March 2012, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals denied his request for a certificate of appealability. In August 2012, he filed another petition in state court, but that was also denied. On September 20th, 2012, the date of his execution arrived. Harris was 40 years old. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles had rejected a clemency request 2 days earlier. The prison officials did not offer a special last meal. They gave Harris the same meal that all other inmates received that day. The United States Supreme Court refused to stop the execution just a few hours before it was scheduled to take place. Harris was taken to the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. He was strapped to a gurney. A half-dozen friends and relatives of his victims watched from another room through a window. His brother and 3 friends also came to watch from a separate area. Harris did not look at the victims' families. He spoke his final words. He told his brother and friends not to worry about him and said he was going home. He mentioned the Texas Rangers baseball team. He did not apologize. The lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered. He snored briefly, then stopped breathing. Robert Wayne Harris was pronounced dead at 6:43 p.m. on September 20th, 2012, and the case of the Meaty-Fine car wash murders was finally closed. Story 5. Cleve Foster was born on October 24, 1963. He was a white male. He grew up in Henderson, Kentucky. Henderson County is in the western part of the state. His family lived there for many years. Cleve was one of several children. He had brothers and sisters. His father was an alcoholic. This means his father drank too much alcohol very often. When his father drank, he became mean and aggressive. Cleve's father hit his children with belts and with branches from trees. This happened many times while Cleve was growing up. The beatings were painful and regular. Cleve also witnessed other terrible things. He saw his father sexually abuse his brother. He also learned later that his father sexually abused his sisters as well. The home was not safe for any of the children. His mother also had drinking problems. She had medical issues later in life. The family environment was full of fear and violence. Cleve went to school in Henderson. He finished high school. He completed 12 years of education. He got his high school diploma. After school, he worked at different jobs. He worked in oil fields. He worked in construction. He also did general labor work. These were physical jobs that did not require advanced training. At some point, Cleve decided to join the United States Army. He stayed in the Army for a long time. He served for nearly 20 years. He became a sergeant first class. This is a senior non-commissioned officer rank. He was proud of his military service. During his time in the Army, he was sent to Iraq. He received a Bronze Star. However, the Bronze Star was given for merit and not for heroism in combat. He also told people he had been in combat and had gruesome experiences. Because of these experiences, he later said he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. This meant he had emotional problems from his time in the service. While in the Army, Cleve got married. He had a wife and they had a son together. But his marriage was not peaceful. He was verbally and physically abusive toward his wife. When she became pregnant, he became worse. He would hit her head against a wall during arguments. He tried to push her out of a moving car. He even assaulted her in front of their son. She was afraid of him. Their marriage was full of conflict. Cleve also had a criminal record from before the military or during his early adulthood. In 1984, he committed a robbery. He put a knife to a victim's neck and stole from them. He was convicted of this robbery. He was placed on probation. He was supposed to report to a probation officer and pay fees. At one point, he failed to report and did not pay his fees. His probation was almost revoked, but he eventually completed it and got a letter recommending early discharge from probation. Later in his military career, Cleve became an Army recruiter. He was stationed in Fort Worth, Texas. His job was to find young people who wanted to join the Army. He was good at this job. He recruited many young people. One of the people he recruited was a young man named Sheldon Ward. Sheldon was much younger than Cleve. Cleve became a mentor to Sheldon. He helped Sheldon join the Army. They became close friends. They started spending a lot of time together. They went to bars and did things together. But Cleve's career as a recruiter ended badly. There were serious accusations against him. He was accused of giving alcohol to underage potential recruits. That means he provided beer or liquor to teenagers who were not old enough to drink legally. He was also accused of having sex with an underage potential recruit. This meant he had sexual relations with a person who was below the legal age of consent. Because of these accusations, the Army started court-martial proceedings against him. A court-martial is a military trial. He was not allowed to re-enlist in the army. He was forced to leave the military after nearly 20 years. He became a civilian again. After leaving the army, Cleve stayed in the Fort Worth area. He did not have a steady military job anymore. He went back to doing physical labor jobs. He worked in oil fields and construction again. He also kept his friendship with Sheldon Ward. Sheldon had also left the army or was still in contact. They began living together in different places. They shared motel rooms and apartments. They did many things together. They went to bars regularly. One of their favorite bars was a place called Fat Albert's in Fort Worth. They went there often. They were regular customers there. They knew the staff and other customers. They would go there at least 2 or 3 times a week. Cleve's ex-wife was no longer in his life. His family was scattered. His mother could not travel because of medical problems. His sisters were homeless and out of contact. His brother had been murdered years earlier. Cleve had a difficult past with violence, alcohol, and family problems. He also had a history of violence toward women, as shown by the abuse of his ex-wife and the robbery. He had a pattern of aggressive behavior. But he remained close to Sheldon Ward. They were inseparable. They continued to hang out together, go to bars, and spend their nights together. They shared a motel room. They had very few other close friends. Cleve was now a civilian, living a simple life in Fort Worth, working odd jobs, and spending his free time with his younger friend Sheldon. On the evening of February 13th, 2002, Cleve Foster and Sheldon Ward went to Fat Albert's bar in Fort Worth, as they did many nights. That night, a woman named Nainur Pal was also there. She was 28 years old. She was a black female. She was originally from Sudan, a country in Africa. She had come to the United States to live with her uncle and his wife. She worked at a country club. She was a regular customer at Fat Albert's, just like Foster and Ward. The bartender noticed that Pal interacted mostly with Ward that night. They danced together. The dancing was described as suggestive. Ward behaved inappropriately toward her at times, but Foster did not do that. The bar closed at 2 a.m. on February 14th. When it closed, Foster, Ward, and Pal walked out together into the parking lot. Pal and Ward talked for a few minutes. Then Pal got into her own car and started to drive away. Foster was driving his truck. Ward was in the passenger seat. They followed Pal's car very closely. The bartender saw this and thought it was unusual. She said Foster's truck was right on Pal's bumper. There was no space between the two vehicles. They drove out of the parking lot that way. Instead of going home, Foster and Ward followed Pal to her apartment complex. Her car was later found there, parked and unlocked, with her cell phone on the front seat. But Pal did not stay at her apartment that night. At some point, she got into Foster's truck. It is not clear if she went willingly or was forced, but later evidence showed that she went with them to the motel room where Foster and Ward lived. That motel was called the Great Western Inn. They shared room number 117. Inside that motel room, sexual acts happened. Foster later claimed that he took sleeping pills and drank beer and fell asleep. He said he woke up to find Pal performing oral sex on him. But physical evidence told a different story. DNA tests later showed that Foster's semen was found inside Pal's vagina. Ward's semen was found inside her anus. Ward's DNA was also possibly a minor contributor to the vaginal sample. So both men had sex with her. This was not consensual sex based on the circumstances. The sexual assaults happened in the motel room. While Pal was in that room, she was shot in the head. The gun used was a handgun. It was a gun that Ward had bought from a pawn shop in August 2001. The shot was fired at close range. It was a devastating wound. A bullet passed through her brain. There was a lot of blood and brain matter from the wound. After she was shot, her body was not left in the motel room. Her nude body was moved. Someone put duct tape on her, possibly to cover her mouth or bind her. The tape was bloody. Then her body was carried out of the motel room and put into a vehicle. The vehicle was likely Foster's truck. Her body was taken to a remote area in Tarrant County. It was far off a road. There was a ditch there. The body was dumped in that ditch. The duct tape was wadded up and left next to her body. There was no blood splatter at the ditch. This meant she was not shot there. She was shot somewhere else and then carried to that location. About 8 hours later, around 10 a.m. on February 14th, workers were laying pipe in that remote area. They discovered Pal's nude body in the ditch. She had been dead for several hours. The soles of her feet were clean. This showed she had not walked to that location. She had been carried. Her body was found with one arm raised. This suggested two people carried her. One person held her feet and another held her hands. Her body was 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds. Ward was 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 140 pounds. That meant Ward was shorter and only slightly heavier than Pal. It would have been very difficult for Ward alone to carry her body a long distance. But Foster was 6 feet tall and weighed about 225 pounds. He was much bigger and stronger, so the physical evidence pointed to Foster helping to carry the body. This was not the only violent crime that Foster and Ward were involved in. About 2 months earlier, in December 2001, another woman was killed. Her name was Rachel Ernosky. She was 22 years old. She was a white female. She had graduated from Texas Tech University with honors. She worked at a clothing store. She was engaged to be married. On December 18, 2001, she was found shot to death in her bed at her apartment in Fort Worth. Her apartment door was open. The bullet that killed her came from the same handgun that Ward had bought from the pawn shop. That same gun was later found in Foster's motel room. Foster later admitted that he and Ward had been at Rachel's apartment that night. He said they went there for a sexual tryst. He claimed that Rachel asked them to leave, so they left. But she was shot after they left, or they did not really leave. Foster told police that Ward had said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill somebody. Foster knew Ward had that urge. After Rachel was killed, Ward showed Foster a newspaper clipping about her death and said he had his first one. He seemed happily nervous about it. So Foster knew about that murder and did nothing to stop it. After Pal's murder, the police began to ask questions. They learned from the bartender that Foster and Ward were the last people seen with Pal. They also learned that Foster and Ward had followed her out of the parking lot. The police focused on these two men. On February 21, 2002, which was about a week after Pal's body was found, police officers went to the motel room where Foster and Ward lived. Foster was there alone. Ward was not there. The officers searched the room. Foster cooperated. He directed the police to a dresser drawer. Inside that drawer was the handgun that Ward had bought from the pawn shop. The police took the gun. They also searched the back of Foster's truck. They found a cooler. Inside that cooler were many items soaking in cleaning fluid. The cleaning fluid contained bleach. Bleach can destroy DNA evidence. The items included 3 pairs of shoes, black gloves, bungee cords, a hatchet, a knife, and other items. The police suspected these items were being cleaned to remove evidence. Later that same day, Foster went to the police station voluntarily. He was not under arrest. He gave a statement. He also gave a DNA sample. In his first statement, he said Pal had never been inside his truck. Then he changed his story. He said she might have leaned inside it. Then he changed again. He admitted that they went cruising, but he claimed that they brought Pal back to her vehicle at Fat Albert's. That was a lie because her car was found at her apartment complex. He gave multiple inconsistent stories. He never admitted to having vaginal sex with Pal, even though DNA would later prove he did. Police also obtained a DNA sample from Ward on the same night of February 21st. The next morning, Ward made a phone call to a friend. He told the friend he was in trouble because he killed someone. The friend came to the motel to pick up Ward. While in the friend's truck, Ward confessed more. He said he followed a girl home from a bar, forced her into a truck at gunpoint, took her to the country, raped her, and shot her. He did not mention Foster in that confession. The friend then drove to a store and got the police to arrest Ward. Ward then gave his own statement to the police. In that statement, he said he drove alone to Pal's apartment in Foster's truck and picked her up. He claimed the sex was consensual. He said Foster was passed out in the motel room. He said he did not remember firing the gun, but he found himself standing over Pal's body with the gun in his hand. He admitted he stripped her body and dumped her clothes in a dumpster. He also said he left a note in the motel room apologizing to Foster for involving him. That note was not shown at the trial, but its existence was known. Ward's stories did not match Foster's stories. They both gave conflicting accounts. Neither account fully explained the evidence. The evidence showed that Foster's DNA was inside Pal's vagina. The gun that killed her was found in their shared motel room. The items in the cooler were being soaked in bleach to destroy evidence. The body was carried by two people. Foster knew about Ward's desire to kill. Foster was with Ward on both the night of Rachel's murder and the night of Pal's murder. The physical facts pointed to both men being involved in the crimes. But no arrest had been made yet for Foster at this point. He was still free. The police had gathered evidence and were building their case. After the police collected the evidence from the motel room, the gun, the items in the cooler, and the DNA samples from both Foster and Ward, they sent everything to a laboratory for testing. The DNA tests came back with clear results. Foster's semen was found inside Pal's vagina. Ward's semen was found inside her anus. The blood and tissue on the gun matched Pal's DNA. This meant the gun had been used to kill her. The police now had strong physical proof that both men had been involved in sexual acts with Pal, and that the gun from their room had fired the fatal shot. Based on this evidence, Foster was arrested in March 2002, about 1 month after the murder. He was charged with capital murder. In June 2002, a grand jury in Tarrant County formally indicted him for that offense. Ward was also arrested and charged separately. The trial for Cleve Foster began in February 2004 in Tarrant County, Texas. The trial was held in a criminal district court. The prosecution presented all the evidence they had gathered. They showed the jury the DNA results, the gun, and the items from the cooler. They also presented a police detective and the medical examiner. These experts testified that Pal was not shot where her body was found because there was no blood splatter at the ditch. The detective explained that the position of her body and her clean feet showed that two people carried her there. He pointed out that Ward was too small to carry her alone, but Foster was big and strong enough to help. The prosecution also showed that Foster had given multiple inconsistent statements to the police, which showed he was lying. They also presented the testimony of Ward's friend, who said Ward confessed to forcing Pal into a truck and killing her, but did not mention Foster. However, the prosecution argued that Foster was still guilty under the law. The defense lawyer argued that Foster was innocent of the murder. They said that Ward acted alone in the killing. They claimed that Foster only had consensual sex with Pal and then fell asleep. They said that Foster did not know Ward was going to shoot her. They tried to show that Ward was the only one responsible. However, the jury had to consider the law of parties. Under Texas law, a person can be found guilty of capital murder even if they did not personally pull the trigger. If they participated in the crime or helped in any way, they are equally responsible. The jury was instructed on this law. They listened to all the evidence for several days. After their deliberations, they found Foster guilty of capital murder. The verdict was delivered on February 12, 2004. The trial then moved to the penalty phase. This is the part where the jury decides if the person should receive the death penalty or life in prison. The prosecution presented additional evidence to show that Foster was a continuing threat to society. They brought up his prior criminal history. They showed that he had a robbery conviction from 1984, where he put a knife to a victim's neck. They also linked him to the murder of Rachel Ernosky from December 2001. They showed that the same gun used to kill Pal was also used to kill Rachel. They presented evidence that Foster admitted being at Rachel's apartment with Ward, and that Ward had expressed a desire to kill someone. This showed a pattern of violent behavior. The defense tried to reduce the punishment. They presented witnesses who spoke about Foster's positive qualities. They called his father, family friends, and a childhood friend. They also called a psychologist. The psychologist testified that Foster suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in the Army. He also testified that Foster had been physically abused by his alcoholic father as a child. The defense argued that these things made Foster less responsible, or that they were reasons to spare his life. They also mentioned that Foster had served his country for nearly 20 years. However, the prosecution argued that the evidence of his violence and his participation in 2 murders was too strong. After hearing both sides, the jury had to answer 3 special questions. One was about future dangerousness. Another was about whether he actually caused the death or intended to kill. The jury answered these questions in a way that required the death penalty. The judge then sentenced Foster to death by lethal injection on February 12, 2004. Ward was tried separately and also received the death penalty for the same murder. After the sentence, Foster's lawyers began the appeals process. This is a long legal process that happens automatically in death penalty cases. Foster's direct appeal went to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. On April 12, 2006, that court affirmed his conviction and sentence. Foster then filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus in state court. That was rejected on March 21, 2007. He then took his case to federal court. He filed a federal habeas petition. That was denied by a federal district court on December 2, 2008. He appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. That court denied his appeal on March 15, 2010. He also asked the U.S. Supreme Court to review his case several times. The Supreme Court denied his requests multiple times between 2007 and 2012. During this appeals process, Foster received 3 stays of execution from the U.S. Supreme Court in 2011. A stay is a temporary delay of the execution. The first stay came in January 2011, just before he was to be executed. The second stay came in April 2011, only hours before his scheduled death. The third stay came in September 2011. The reasons for the stays involve questions about whether his lawyers had provided adequate representation. His lawyers argued that he had received poor legal help at his trial and during the early appeals. They also argued that he was innocent. But each time, the courts eventually allowed the process to continue. His final execution date was set for September 25, 2012. On that day, September 25, 2012, Foster was at the state penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. He was 48 years old. His final meal was not a special meal. Texas no longer offered special last meals. Instead, he was given the same meal that all other inmates in the unit received. At 6 p.m., he was led into the death chamber. He was strapped to a gurney. Needles were inserted into his veins. He was given a lethal dose of a drug called pentobarbital. Before the drug was administered, he spoke his final words. He expressed love to his family and friends. He said he was ready to go home to meet his Maker. He spoke about God and Jesus. He did not admit to the crime. He did not claim to be innocent either. He turned to the relatives of his victims, who were watching through a window, and said he did not know what they would feel that night. He prayed that they would all meet in heaven. Then the drug began to flow. He said he loved his family. He began to snore and then stopped breathing. He was pronounced dead at 6:43 p.m. He was the 30th person executed in the United States in 2012 and the 9th executed in Texas that year. Sheldon Ward, his co-defendant, had also been sentenced to death. But Ward did not face execution. He died on death row in May 2009 from a brain tumor and brain cancer. He died of natural causes while still in prison. After the execution, the families of the victims spoke to the media. Pal's uncle, Lul Dup, was present. He said that he had come from Sudan to escape war, but they could not escape danger. He said justice was done, though they were sorry to watch Foster die. Rachel Ernosky's father, Terry Ernosky, was also there. He said that the repeated stays of execution had been like picking a scab on an emotional wound. He said that now the wound could finally start to heal. He said that lethal injections seemed too easy compared to what his daughter and Pal experienced, but he accepted that justice had been served. The legal case was finally closed. Foster's body was taken away. The victims' families were left to mourn their losses, but the long legal battle had reached its end. The story of Cleve Foster and the women he harmed came to a final close with his death that evening in Huntsville, Texas.